What's up, y'all? It's Celeste. I use they them pronouns, and I recently made a video talking about that I've been asking more people in my life to use they them pronouns for me, like some of my family and my doctors and other people that I see on a regular basis. Something that I've learned through this process is that a lot of people want to be respectful and use the correct pronouns for people, but they're just not really sure how they them pronouns actually work, and they also are struggling with just trying to figure out how to get used to using they them pronouns in practice. So the purpose of this video is to demystify they them pronouns and just give some practical tips on how to start using them. What this video is not going to be is a defense of they them pronouns. Frankly, they don't really need defending because they're already in use by at least thousands of people, and it's not really up for debate. Plus, there are already a lot of other great resources out there about how they, singular they, is grammatically and historically valid, and so I will link a bunch of that in the description below if you want to learn more about all of that. However, I do want to touch on two grammatical points of resistance that a lot of people run into with they them pronouns, because I think examining them will help you more easily transition to using they them in practice. The first one is the idea that they is only a plural pronoun, and it doesn't make grammatical sense to use it for just one person. But they is actually... Oh my god, I can't believe this. I keep getting a phone call from this unknown number. I don't know who they are, and I just keep getting calls from them. They're not leaving a message or anything, so I don't know anything about them or what they want from me, and I obviously don't want to talk to them, so I guess I'm just going to have to block their number. So notice what I just did? I used they, them, theirs pronouns to talk about this unknown caller, and you probably didn't get confused about who I was talking about. In fact, this is probably something you do yourself all the time because it's really common among English speakers. You might say, "Oh no, somebody left their pen. I hope they don't need it later." Or, "Do you know who this artist is? I really like their use of color." It actually would have been a lot weirder for me to see an unknown number and say, "Oh, this woman keeps calling me. She's so annoying." No one would do that. We're actually really good at not assuming the gender of people we don't know anything about. The problem happens when we try to shift from using gender-neutral language to talk about a hypothetical person that's probably human and that's about all we know about them, to a specific person. That's when your brain gets all panicky and freaking out about grammar and doesn't know what to do, even though just a minute ago you used they, them pronouns to speak about a single person with no problem. Just in case you're still confused though, here's another example. Just as you would say, "Call him Max. He picked his name out himself." You would say, "Call them Max. They picked their name out themselves." You don't need to do anything fancy. Just replace he or she with they and its variations. You don't need to swap anything around like call they Max or them picked they name out they self or anything like that. The other point of resistance I see a lot is the fear that if they is used both singular and plural, it'll be really confusing and nobody will know whether somebody's talking about one person or several. But again, we already have a pronoun that we use for both singular and plural, you. In English, we use you regardless of whether you're talking about or to one person, 5 people, 100 people, 1,000,000 people. It doesn't matter how many people you're talking to. You just say you. Now you can add other words like you all or y'all or yous guys or you folks or whatever, but ultimately in the basics of the language, you is the second person pronoun that we use. It doesn't matter whether it's singular or plural. And yes, occasionally it can be confusing, but most of the time it's pretty clear from the context of the rest of the sentence or the situation that you're in, who you're talking to. And in the cases where it's not, then we just kind of clarify it and move on. Some other languages have separate words for singular and plural, and also sometimes use those words to differentiate between informal and formal. Like you might have one word that you use for your friend and another word you use for your boss. We actually used to do that in English as well. We had ye, which became you, and thou. Ye, or you, was the formal and plural form of the second person pronoun, and thou was the singular or informal one. Calling your friend you then would have been like always calling them sir or Master Smith or something instead of just calling them their first name. Like, yeah, it might be fun to do every once in a while, but it would be really weird if you did that all the time. But in the 17th century, it changed, and the reason that it changed is actually a really interesting parallel to what's happening now with they, because it was a response to social change. The difference is, instead of being about gender, then it was about class, because at that time the middle class was growing, and it was no longer quite as clear how or why or when to differentiate between an inferior and superior and informal and formal. So everybody just kind of eventually defaulted to the formal version, which was you, and that just kind of overtook and replaced thou. So thou kind of fell out of favor, and after a little while, you stopped being formal because it was used for everybody. So I partly wanted to share that because I'm a big nerd and I think that's really interesting. But I think it also is a good illustration of how language molds itself to our use and to our cultural needs, and not the other way around. In my opinion, resistance to using they, them pronouns is not really a grammar issue. It's a mindset issue. You already have the grammar. I just showed that. We already do this in our language. The hard part is getting your mind to shift from using that language to describe a hypothetical person to a specific one. So how do you do that? Part of it requires you to actually make a shift in your mind about who that person is and what their identity is. Using somebody's correct pronouns isn't just a courtesy that you do to them to their face so that you're polite or making them happy. It's an act of validation. It's saying, I see who you really are and I respect that. If you're willing to use they, them pronouns for somebody to be nice, but then privately you're still thinking of them as, say, a girl, then first of all, you're not really entirely respecting their identity. But second of all, you're also making it a lot harder on yourself because you're trying to force your brain to hold these two opposing ideas, the old one, which is incorrect, and the new one, which you're trying to learn, at the same time, which makes it a lot harder to learn the new thing when you're trying to hold on to this old thing. So one thing that will help a lot is don't just use they, them pronouns to the person's face or when the person is there. You're going to have a lot less opportunity to practice doing it that way and a lot less opportunity for your brain to catch up and solidify the idea of this person and their actual identity. Especially since when you're talking to somebody, you're way more likely to be using you as opposed to he, she, they, or any other third-person pronouns. So do this when they're not around as well. With the exception of cases where you think that person might not want to be outed to somebody, or in different situations like that, then that's a different story. But in general, use they, them pronouns when you're talking about this person to other people when that person is not even around. Now, I know you might be thinking, not everyone I'm talking to is going to understand they, them pronouns and they're going to be confused, and I don't really want to have to explain it to them. But here's the thing. You explaining it to people, especially to cis people, is a hugely cool ally move because it takes a lot of the burden off of us to have to always be advocating for ourselves. And it lets you be a model for other people to show them how it's done, to show them that it's done, that it's a thing that you can do, and that is actually done in real life. It's not just like a weird theoretical thing on the internet. If you treat it like a weird thing that you're embarrassed about having to do, that's the message other people are going to get. But if you treat it like a normal thing that is just like a thing that you're now integrating into your life, that's the message other people will get. And in time, it will stop seeming like a really unusual thing because right now, the only reason it seems confusing is because people aren't used to it. But every time you do it, that's giving them more examples of it being used. Even if you don't take the time to explain it to them, just the fact that you did it and they heard you say they to describe a person, even if they thought it was weird at the time, maybe they thought it was totally weird. But the next time they hear that, they're going to have that in their brain. They're going to have that as an example of this has been done before. This is something that I'm now sort of starting to understand. And just every time that they hear it, it's going to be better. So you can help with that. You can be the example that helps them start seeing it. Also practice when you're by yourself, even when that person's not around, even when nobody else is around. When you're thinking about that person, use the pronouns in your head or speak them aloud or write them down. Just try to do everything you can to associate those pronouns with that person for your brain. If this is a person you have other mutual connections with, like friends or family, then you can all be practice buddies together. You can make an agreement that you'll try to catch each other and correct each other gently when you do slip up. And it's not about catching each other to call each other out or to make anybody feel bad. It's just about working together to help each other learn and sort of have this shared goal that you're both working toward. And getting used to catching it when other people slip up is going to help you catch yourself when you slip up as well. If you do catch yourself, you don't have to make a big deal out of it, but do correct yourself. Just say something like, I saw them walking down the street. Don't just say him and then pretend like you didn't. We don't need a big apology, but Acknowledging it lets us know that you understand how important it is and that you are trying. And it also keeps us from having to weigh in our minds whether or not we need to, or whether it's worth it to try to correct you in that moment, because that can be kind of exhausting. And on that note, if you do mess up and notice that people aren't correcting you, don't take that to mean that it's okay to use the wrong pronouns. Like I said, it can be really draining to correct people all the time. So please don't leave all of the work to the trans person to be the one to have to correct you all the time. Be proactive in your own learning. Practice on your own. Practice with other people. Practice as much as you possibly can. And don't just have it be a thing that you're only doing when you're with that person. Do your homework. It's going to be way easier on you, and it's going to be way easier on the trans person, who is probably already dealing with this with a lot of other people as well. One other thing I've heard of some people doing is something similar to a swear jar, where every time you slip up, you owe that person 10 cents or whatever. I've heard of especially a lot of parents doing this for their younger trans kids. It's not really about the money, it's more about just helping you be more aware and paying more attention to how much you're actually slipping up, and also giving you kind of an incentive to pay more attention to it and do it correctly. So that might be something to try if you're still struggling with it. So try not to get stuck too much on the grammar. It just takes some practice to use what you're already doing in a slightly different way. Instead, concentrate on really seeing that person as the identity they actually are, whether it's non-binary, genderqueer, agender, or whatever, as opposed to letting your brain default to something that's not correct. And practice, practice, practice. If you have any other tips that I didn't mention, please leave them in the comments below. I know I would love to hear them, and I'm sure lots of other people would find them useful as well. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my future content, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.